Okay, can you see that screen okay, Yabo?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, I can.
Great stuff. Okay, then improving competitive supply chain. Learning outcome 1 for question 1. We'll look at 1.1 to start with. There is 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. And 1.1 is you need to be able to compare supply chains, networks and SCM. So a fairly straightforward one. What's a supply chain? What's a supply network? What's supply management? And the actual content is definitions of them, and also understanding tiering and network sourcing. So those are the areas they can ask you a question on, and generally they will ask you maybe about the principles of supply chain management from the case study. So a fairly straightforward section. So supply chains, there's a picture of a chain there which is often visualised as representing a supply chain, but is it a good metaphor? It possibly isn't, as we'll see in a minute. Any thoughts why it might not be a good graphic for a supply chain?
No, I don't know.
No, that's fine.
But I think to me,
Yeah.
okay, I will say that it could stand independently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although it has a link.
Yeah. It's. I think you're hinting at the right thing. It's quite simplistic, and it implies it's a linear link going in a straight line, where the supply chain, in fact, is more of a network than a straight chain, and there are various flows: time, information, money. So there's some definitions here of supply chains. You don't need more than one. I personally like the ones that mention the upstream and downstream linkages. So if it's one with this upstream, downstream, whereas the SIPS one is a little complicated, because I always immediately think, right, supply chain management, supply chains, well, there's upstream going back to your suppliers, downstream going to your customers, and you're there hopefully in the middle coordinating the supply chain. So one good definition, and it helps you then explain SCM. So there's 3 there, it's take your pick really. Another definition there from Shopper and Mendel, suppliers, manufacturers. Yeah, it's not my favourite, but again, personal choice. Another definition there from some of the well-known textbooks. So network involved upstream, downstream linkages in the different processes and that produce value in the form of product. So that's the definition I would personally learn. It's easy to remember, I think, because if you remember the upstream and downstream bit, and then we've got links, processes, activities, so I'm afraid it's simply to learn. Evolutionary there. Customers apply to supply chains, but we can see here, and I'll just see, globalised, and realised, as I said, it did then say, and I've lost the
What we did in level 4.
Yes, that's got the case study, hasn't it?
Is it like that?
It is, yeah. You've got to refer to the case study all the time.
Okay.
We match it, very difficult. Losing sight of common objectives. I'm glad that the whole is not on our side. So of course it's everybody together, allegedly. Value, strategies, traditional ways of doing supply chain to new ways, and of course the old way was protective, transactional, etc., and new ways tend to be, oh, I've got to be careful here, this rotten. I'll be careful with that pointer, I think it stops it. Networks, decisions have to be made. How to configure networks, that's your before, and that's your after. So this would be your tier 1, your supplier X, and tier 2s would be suppliers 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's easy to coordinate. So that's one way of structuring your network or your supply chain.
Slow.
Yep.
That is looking at it from the raw material stage.
Yes.
To the manufacturing.
Yeah.
To when it logistics, to when it gets to the supplier, and for instance, like electronic equipment, returning it, disposing it and telling the manufacturer to come and pick it up.
It is, so it's like the redirect, so it's the return, reuse,
the redirecting.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So it is the cradle to grave, not just ship it out, get rid of it, but there's something happens at the end, isn't it? Return it for recycling or reuse. So redirectors would be a good example. Yeah.
Okay.
Network sourcing sort of came across from Japan, and it's not a word that's used a lot now, but it's about tiering, innovation, close relationships, pretty common in the car industry. So that's a concept, but there's a lot, 1, 2, 3, there's a lot of facts on there to learn, but you think, well, may need to learn that list, but it's not.
Sorry, can you come again? You said something about car industry.
Yeah, the automotive industry, the cars, so the Toyotas and Hondas and everybody, when the such as Heinz went over to Japan and studied what they were doing, they realised that they were tiering, they only had a small number of suppliers. At first we thought it was just in time that they were doing, but it was much more. It was the lean network supply chain, which is different than how we used to do it in the Western world. So it was first developed in the Japanese car industry, and much mimicked throughout the world. But there's quite a lot of facts there, too many probably for now to go through, but we'll come back to those if that's okay. And obviously there are risks though, particularly in Western companies, of only having a few suppliers because of disruption, locked in, confidentiality, etc. And if people have found now with Brexit, they could find that they're locked into a country where they can't import or export without hitting tariffs. So there's always a risk. You've done that many times at level 4 in having a narrow supply base. They're fairly straightforward reasons. Why do we need supply chain management? It's the same as why do we need procurement? Cost, time, reliability, response, globalisation, kitchen sink, everything. There's a multitude of reasons. And of course it's said that people compete now in supply chains rather than with their own product offering. So having a competitive supply chain is key to winning business. So we need to manage the supply chain. And of course we will look at Kraljek at some stage, and Kraljek was the first person to realise that we need to be more proactive and not just buy products, but we need to be proactive and manage strategic supplies differently than other supplies. So supply chain management is recognising that procurement needs to shape markets, and you could say purchase and procurement are a subset of SCM. So I think procurement's slightly narrower than SCM. It talks briefly about how to create innovation. That's it's a very, very difficult concept for level 5, is that risk. And now 1.3. Again, we're on the added value, theoretical perspectives this time, as opposed to methods. So it's very, very similar to 1.2, but this is about theory. So what theories do you think will come up here, Yabu, that are to do with added value? What theories might you want to?
I think total value stream.
Yes, yeah. The value chain analysis is probably the most wide ones that's cited. Now, because you haven't done level 5, there is also when we're looking at value engineering on operations management, particularly at level 5, value engineering is about building quality into the design.
From the start.
Yeah, so one of the formulas in that, which is quite useful, is that value equals function divided by cost. Now, the important thing about that is people think it's only about reducing cost, but you can also increase functionality.
Can you come again, please, about
Yeah.
the value
Yeah.
engineering?
Yeah, so value engineering, or a definition of value, so value equals function or functionality divided by cost.
Okay.
So to increase value, you can of course reduce cost, which is what most people discuss.
To increase value, you need to reduce cost.
Yeah, or you can improve functionality. Just 2 seconds, Amiibo, what be saying? Recording, yeah. So, but by having better features, by more differentiation, by having more whizzos on, by increasing the functionality, how people desire it, that also increases added value. So
But it is
so
very hard, very difficult to increase value while at the same time reducing cost.
it can be. The danger is you could reduce value, but the easy way to answer a question, of course, on added value is reduce cost, but keep the functionality the same. But there is the danger, yeah, I know, I agree with you that eventually it becomes cheap and cheerful and it's not worth it, is it? But from the SIP's point of view, we're trying to say how can we add value. So it can be by sourcing properly, by managing the sourcing process, which we did at level 4. Process mapping can help add value by identifying waste. And value chain analysis helps us understand the linkages in the value chain and where value is added. So quite a broad view, added value. There's a marketing one here, core products, actual products, and the augmented product. So if you look at any marketing textbook, they talk about how you add value to a customer through the core product, the actual product, and the augmented product. A little bit in your study guide on it. I'm not keen on it, but it's a concept. It's a concept.
What do you mean by core product and actual product?
Well, the core product is I bought a pen, but the augmented product might be that it's it's got a brand name, it's got a diamond in the end. It gives me other benefits because I can show off with it. So you've got the basic product, and then you get other benefits because you've got it. That's sort of, yeah, it's a bit of an odd concept, isn't it? But it's worth a look at. There's some very good videos on YouTube on that. Value chain, I won't show the videos. We know what this is. It's how value is added from raw materials to finished. And of course, it doesn't matter whether you agree with the 5 primary ops. It was a concept that Porter developed to illustrate a concept. In some companies, procurement might be in primary. Some companies it's barely a support. HR in some companies might be more important than others. It matters not really. It's about how well.
I think it depends on the sector.
Yes. Yeah, I think manufacturing as opposed to services, retail, public sector, it does vary, doesn't it? So it's an important concept, and it links to a later section 2 and 3, which is not for today, of how we get competitive advantage. And competitive advantage can come from how well we manage the supply stroke value chain. So primary value adding activities are the 5 ops, inbound ops, we've done these before, outbound marketing, services, they're all fairly easy. Support activities, again with procurement in there, we know what they are. Good supply chain management can add value by selecting good suppliers, negotiation, dialogue, liaison, better stock management, 1, 2, 3, 4. So these sort of lists, I'm afraid, have got to be learnt, or you've got to be fairly familiar where you can find them. But what's important in the case study is to be able to link them in the case study by saying procurement are working with suppliers on dialogue. This is a way they can add value. They could also add value by improving the stock management to minimise costs. In the case study, they are negotiating. This is a way of reducing the cost of inputs. So it's that link between theory and context. But you could have problems with Porter's model. Yeah, it's got weaknesses. The distinction between primary, it's static. It focuses on profitability. Again, the textbook's got a whole few pages on that. And it's probably unlikely you're going to critique it, because mostly in the case study they will be asking you to analyse the structure, analyse competitive advantage. They won't really be asking you to critique Porter's model. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, other than you might just throw a few lines in. And there are other models, or there are limitations with the model, just for higher marks.
Okay.
Yeah, organisation structure impacts on added value, about making sure everyone's got clear roles, relationships, commitment. So obviously organisation structure can be a hindrance, or it can support effective working, and it sometimes hinders supply chain management because of the functional nature of it. But obviously we understand what structure are. We often need flexible, delayed, quick, agile structures. So there's a more trends to have more flexible structures. Yeah, very trendy word in there. We could centralise procurement. We could devolve and decentralise in it, and you've done that many times on your level 4. So,
please, can you explain this process mapping in your own words?
Yeah, I think process mapping is looking how an internal process works, about the movement of materials or things. So you're just really putting down with arrows or flows what happens. How do you raise a purchase order? And you'll say, well, first someone raises a requisition, then it goes to here for approval, it's approved yes or no, then it goes there. So it is about a process itself.
Internal processes.
Yeah. Although you can map as well joint processes with suppliers, but we'll come on to that. But generally it's in one of those boxes. In the mapping, as you can identify then, is the things in there we need to be doing? Is the problems with the process? Does it cover all eventualities, or do we need to redesign the process? So it can be useful for identifying. It's good for training, but it can be used in process mapping to eliminate waste. They're showing the book an IDF process. I don't like that, where it shows inputs and outputs. It's from one of the project management books, and I wouldn't personally go near that one.
It looks like the diagram of transformation.
It is, yeah, and then they've added 2 things here. It does, it's the transformation one with, and it's taken, it's from a project management book, and I wouldn't learn it, don't go there. It talks there about list all the steps, record the times, identify the steps that don't add value, move the boxes. So you can actually do a before and after value flow chart, which are in my notes, and it shows you an example where they've mapped a process with lots of waiting time, lots of activities, and then they simplify it with a new process. So that's the idea of it, is not simply to map it, but also to identify where you could improve it or change processes. So that's the slight difference between a value added flowchart and a normal flowchart. We can analyse the value chain as well for value adding activities, not just processes. We can also do value chain analysis by looking at the linkages, how well they work together. We can manage the sourcing process to make sure we do things efficiently. Carter's 10 C's, making sure we pick capable and competent suppliers. How do we make sure we make the right decision? Well, we've got to have proper metrics, we've got to have proper selection, etc. So quite a general section there. It really is some fairly general ideas. The notes, which I won't flick to because the recording will stop you, boo, have some examples of flowcharts and mapping. But again, unless it's in the case study, the one we'll look at when we get onto lean, I'd like to look at value stream mapping, which is a lean technique for identifying waste in the supply chain. it is about mapping, but it's a particular lean technique which in procurement is quite heavily used. Okay, the last section then, I'll try and speed up, sorry I've gone a little slow there, is just about the relationships. You've done the spectrum before.
Yeah.
You can either have a collaborative relationship or you can be quite competitive. You can outsource and you can offshore or global procurement. And on the case study, they've often shown a company like Dyson who have gone offshore or gone to low-cost sourcing, and they've
Have they?
and they've sometimes just say to you, discuss the problems of low-cost sourcing for Dyson, or discuss the problems through low-cost sourcing. So this part of the syllabus.
So that is Dyson. They've moved their company international.
Yeah, Dyson manufacture most of the stuff in Malaysia, but their science and development are in Wales. So the sort of innovation and development work is UK, but the actual manufacturing is offshore. Yeah, they moved it quite a few years ago to Malaysia. So they get it done very, very low cost, and they charge premium prices. So they've got a very, very good model. Yeah, and whether it's right or wrong is another thing. So this one's quite easy. The relationship spectrum, you've done that before, where you've got adversarial right through to co-destiny, and you've got this whole spectrum. So that's
the co-destiny one is not emphasized in SIPs. They don't talk about it as much as partnership.
No, they don't, and I think it's more at a business level than procurement. It's where companies actually have formal structures, and they might set up a joint company. So I think probably, I agree with you, purchasing probably stops here at round here. Co-destiny is co-manufacturing, cooperative. I don't like it as a word. Yeah, so I'm with you on that one. Don't worry. They won't ask you to explain all 7 of those, but they might. The case study, you might say they've got quite an adversarial arm's length relationship. This causes them problems of this and this. If they perhaps move to a more strategic alliance, they could benefit because of this. So it's more on a generic level, writing a good essay.
What does strategic alliance mean?
That's a good question. It's, well, I would.
I know strategy means future.
Yes, strategic alliance is a long-term cooperation, whereas partnership can be on a particular project. So I think a strategic alliance where you have a strategic suppliers that you use all the time, though the difference is minimal, isn't it? Difference is minimal. I'm pretty sure I've got a definition in my notes on that if you have a look when I send them you, Boo.
Okay.
The culture would come into that, distance, trust, etc. Features of a good supply partnership. Agreed objectives, again, that's pretty much level 4 stuff. What makes good partnership sourcing, good cultural compatibility, joint objectives. Again, I struggle to remember all these, but I could quickly turn them up for an exam. Partnering, advantages, disadvantages. Advantages, disadvantages, which again you've done before, and that they are just to learn, I'm afraid. Adversarial relationships, competitive model, that slide is probably worth, and that's in my notes, where there's lack of trust, short contractions, waste, so it's ineffective. Switching costs, obviously there are problems with switching suppliers. Costs of switching, familiarity, learning curves, risk. Make, buy or do, again level 4, you did that 100 times. Process outsourcing, drivers of outsourcing, outsourcing itself. What to outsource? Well, the key is as to whether it's core to the company. If it's,
I know, but I've never seen it in this diagram.
Right. So if it's core, you probably should keep it in-house.
In-house.
But if it's not core, you might outsource it. And then there are the various combinations. But of course, Carter said, of course, that depends how good your contractors are, whether you keep it in-house still or whether you let them do it. So if they're strictly that should say the relative competence of the contractors, because if you're better at them and it's not core, you would still make it yourself.
Okay.
But it just, so one of the problems is, how do you decide whether it's a core? Well, this is very simplistic, isn't it? Low or high? Well, it's never that clear, is it? People get it wrong.
In outsourcing,
Yep.
we were taught that if it's a specialist item,
Yep.
that you keep it in house.
Yeah, if it's
But
yep.
but when I was working in the hospital, there's some items that are specialist items, but they have to outsource it because, like, I'm talking of equipment for operation.
Yep. Yep.
It has to be sterilized to certain extent, which the hospital cannot afford.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So those ones are specialists, and yet still has to be outsourced.
Yeah. No, you're still after in that case. So it isn't only if it's it might be important to you. So you might collaborate with an outsourced supplier. So this collaboration one is a bit of a vague word, but you can still outsource something that's important, but you'd have to work very closely with the supplier. So this collaboration should say collaborative outsourcing, probably. Does that make sense? And then that would fit your example.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How do we decide what's core? Well, it should help you access markets if it's commercial. It should give you benefits for the customer, and it should be difficult for competitors to imitate. And that's a test from Prahalad and Hamel. So if it's important, if it gives you competitive advantage, and if it's difficult for competitors to imitate, then perhaps you should be doing it yourself, because people get it wrong.
Okay, like Amazon.
Yeah, there's been quite a few, and there's an example of not somebody getting it wrong recently, but I know Marks and Spencer's, it was about 5 weeks ago, I think, or could be 2 months now, have announced they're completely outsourcing their IT infrastructure to another company. But there's plenty of cases where people have to bring it back. There's 3 tests. Outsourcing is obviously a difficult decision and many problems. International sourcing, advantages, disadvantages, fairly straightforward. Interdependence of adjacent risks and low cost. So this is a graphic that I've put in just about challenges of low cost sourcing, more risks, but there are benefits.